My name is Mark and I want to tell you about the worst period of my life. It all started last year when my wife Ursula was admitted to the hospital with serious back problems. The doctors said she needed complex surgery and a long rehabilitation period. I was working as a manager at a mid-sized company in Chicago at the time, and when Ursula ended up in the hospital, my whole world turned upside down. She had been lying there for 3 weeks already, and I would drive to see her every day after work. But the real shock was waiting for me later. A month after the surgery, the doctors said recovery was going slowly. Ursula was weak, constantly sleeping from the medications. I felt helpless watching her. That's when I met Jennifer, a younger nurse who worked in the department. Jennifer always asked about my well-being, brought coffee when I sat by my wife's bedside. At first it seemed like just professional care. But gradually our conversations became longer. She talked about her work and I talked about my worries. One evening, when Ursula was sleeping after another procedure, Jennifer suggested we go get coffee in the hospital cafeteria. I agreed, thinking it would help me get my mind off the heavy thoughts for a bit. In the cafeteria we talked about everything. Jennifer was so alive, cheerful, the complete opposite of what I saw in the ward. When she laughed, I forgot about all my problems for a moment. But the real turn of events was waiting for me in a few days. Jennifer started texting me outside the hospital. At first she was just asking how things were, then telling funny stories from work. I replied to her, enjoying this lively communication amid all the hospital atmosphere. A week later she invited me to lunch. She said she wanted to support me during this difficult period. I knew it was wrong, but I agreed. Ursula had been lying in the hospital for 2 months already, barely conscious, and I felt so lonely. During lunch, Jennifer took my hand and said she understood how hard it was for me. Her touch was warm, alive, so different from the cold hospital atmosphere. I didn't pull my hand away. The next few weeks we met more and more often. At first it was just lunches, then walks in the park after my hospital visits. Jennifer said I deserved support and understanding during this period. But the worst was still ahead. One day Jennifer kissed me. It happened so unexpectedly. We were standing by her car after another walk. I should have stopped it, but I couldn't. All those months of loneliness, fear for Ursula, helplessness gathered into one point. Over the next 2 weeks, we met at her apartment. I lied to myself that it was temporary, that it was just a way to get through this nightmare. Jennifer was so young, energetic, she brought me back to life. But fate had other plans. One morning the doctor called me at work and said Ursula had unexpectedly started recovering. She had woken up, was conscious, and was asking for me to come. I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, feeling both joy and a terrible sense of guilt. When I entered the ward, Ursula smiled at me for the first time in 3 months. She was weak, but her eyes were shining again. I sat next to her and took her hand, trying not to think about the fact that these same hands had embraced another woman. Ursula said she remembered almost everything, how I came every day, read her books, told her about work. She thanked me for my loyalty and support. Each of her words hit me like a knife. But the most horrible part hadn't started yet. The next few days I tried to avoid Jennifer, but it was difficult. She worked in the same department. When we met, she looked at me with understanding and even winked. I felt disgusting. Ursula was recovering quickly. The doctors said she would soon be able to return home. I should have been happy, but instead I felt panic. How would I live with her, knowing what I had done? One evening as I sat by Ursula's bed, Jennifer entered the ward with medications. She smiled friendly at my wife and said she was happy about her recovery. Then she looked at me and added, "Your husband is so devoted. He's here every day, never leaves you." Ursula squeezed my hand and said, "I know. I'm the luckiest woman in the world." I barely restrained myself from crying with shame. But fate was preparing the last, most cruel blow for us. The next day I decided to talk to Jennifer and tell her that everything between us was over. I found her in the staff break room during her break. She was sitting alone, drinking coffee. "Jennifer, I need to talk to you," I began. She smiled. "I know what you want to say. Ursula is recovering and you feel guilty. But think about it, you were having a hard time and I was there for you." "This is a mistake," I said. "I love my wife. What we had needs to end." Jennifer stood up and approached me. "Are you sure? We could be together. I'm younger, I understand you." At that very moment, Ursula entered the room. She stood in the doorway in a hospital gown, leaning on crutches. Her face was pale, but not from illness. She saw everything, how Jennifer stood close to me, how she touched my hand. "Mark," she said quietly. I jumped away from Jennifer, but it was too late. Ursula understood everything from our behavior. Her eyes filled with tears. Ursula, I can explain. I began. But she just turned and walked away, dragging her crutches across the corridor floor. I ran after her, but she stopped me with a gesture. Don't come near me, she said without turning around. When I returned to the break room, Jennifer was already gone. I sat there for an hour, not knowing what to do next. Finally, I went to Ursula's ward. She was lying turned to the wall. When I approached, she said, "How long did it last?" I couldn't lie. 2 weeks. While I was lying here fighting for my life, you were having fun with a nurse. Her voice was cold as ice. Ursula, it was hard for me, I felt lonely. She turned to me. Her eyes were dry, but in them was such pain that I will never forget. Lonely? I was here, Mark. I was fighting to come back to you. And you were looking for comfort in another woman's bed. The next days were horrible. Ursula barely spoke to me. When the doctor said she could go home, she asked her sister to pick her up. She didn't want to see me. At home we lived like strangers. Ursula slept in the guest room and I in our bedroom, which now seemed huge and empty. Every morning I found a list of things I needed to do on the kitchen counter. In the evening she went to bed early to avoid meeting me. A week later she told me the only long phrase during all this time, "Mark, I filed for divorce. The lawyer will contact you tomorrow." I tried to object, beg, explain, but she just left the room. The divorce process lasted 3 months. Ursula took half of everything we had built together over 15 years. The worst part was that she never screamed or made scenes. She just became a stranger to me. On the day of signing the divorce papers, I tried to talk to her one last time. "Ursula, is there even the slightest chance that we could?" She looked at me with the same cold gaze. "Mark, when I was lying in the hospital, I only thought about how I would come home to you. That thought gave me strength to fight. And now I know that home no longer exists." After the divorce, I moved to a small apartment on the other side of town. Jennifer wrote to me several times, but I didn't respond. What we had ended the moment Ursula saw us together. A year has passed. I still work the same job, live in the same small apartment. Sometimes I see Ursula at the store or on the street. She looks better, healthy, strong. But when our eyes meet, she looks right through me as if I don't exist. Every day I think about what I lost. Not just my wife, but respect for myself. I betrayed a person who was fighting for her life, who believed in me even when she couldn't tell me so. The worst thing is that I can't justify my actions even to myself. There were no special circumstances, no years of unhappy marriage. There was just weakness, selfishness, and the inability to be the man my wife deserved. Now that I've told this story, I hope someone who finds themselves in a similar situation will be able to stop. Because the price for a moment of weakness can be your entire life. But there's more to this story that I haven't told you yet. The weeks following our encounter in the hospital break room were the most agonizing of my life. Ursula's silence was deafening. She had built walls around herself that I couldn't penetrate. Every attempt at conversation was met with cold professionalism. She would discuss practical matters like bills or household tasks, but nothing personal. I remember one particular evening about 2 weeks after she caught me with Jennifer. I was sitting in our living room staring at the TV but not really watching anything. Ursula came down from upstairs and for a moment I thought she might sit with me, that maybe we could talk. Instead, she walked past me to the kitchen and began making herself tea. I followed her, desperate for any kind of interaction. "Ursula, please, can we just talk? I know I made a terrible mistake, but we've been together for 15 years. Doesn't that count for something?" She continued stirring her tea without looking at me. 15 years, she repeated quietly. 15 years of marriage, and the moment I needed you most, you found someone else. "It wasn't like that," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. She finally looked at me then, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't anger, it was worse. It was disappointment and a kind of resigned sadness that cut deeper than any rage could have. "Mark, do you know what the worst part is? It's not even that you cheated. It's that you made me doubt everything. Every time you came to visit me in the hospital, every 'I love you,' every promise that we'd get through this together, now I wonder if any of it was real." Those words haunted me because I realized she was right. In my selfishness, I hadn't just broken our marriage, I had poisoned every good memory we shared. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of guilt and regret. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office not because I had to, but because going home meant facing the ghost of our relationship. My colleagues noticed the change in me, but I couldn't bring myself to explain what was happening. Jennifer tried to contact me several times during this period. She would call my office, send text messages, even showed up at a coffee shop near my workplace one afternoon. I avoided all her attempts at communication, but her persistence only added to my stress. One evening she was waiting by my car in the company parking lot. "Mark, we need to talk," she said as I approached. "There's nothing to talk about, Jennifer. What we had is over. My wife knows and my marriage is destroyed. I hope you're happy." She looked hurt by my harsh tone. "I never wanted your marriage to end. I thought you cared about me. I was vulnerable and made a terrible mistake. But that's all, it was a mistake. Please just leave me alone." As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of her in my rearview mirror, standing alone in the empty parking lot. For a moment, I felt sorry for her, but that sympathy was quickly overwhelmed by the weight of what I had lost. At home, Ursula was packing. Not dramatically, not in anger, but with the methodical precision of someone who had made a decision and was seeing it through. She had boxes labeled in her neat handwriting, kitchen items, books, photos. "You're really leaving?" I said, though it wasn't a question. "Yes." She didn't stop packing. I called my sister. "I'm going to stay with her while we sort out the divorce details." I watched her fold clothes that I had bought for her, pack books we had read together, wrap picture frames containing photos of happier times. Each item that went into a box felt like another piece of our life together being erased. "What about counseling? What about trying to work through this?" She paused in her packing and looked at me with tired eyes. "Mark, you made your choice when you chose to be with her instead of being faithful to me. I can't unknow what I know. I can't unfeel what I felt when I saw you two together." That night, I lay in our bed alone for the first time in 15 years. The house felt enormous and empty, full of echoes of conversations and laughter that would never happen again. I kept reaching for the phone, wanting to call someone, anyone, to talk about what I was going through, but I realized I had no one to call. All our friends had been couple friends, and I couldn't bear the thought of explaining what had happened. The divorce proceedings began a month later. Our lawyer, a woman named Patricia whom we had consulted years earlier for estate planning, looked uncomfortable as she explained the process to us. We sat on opposite sides of her conference table, and the distance between us felt like a chasm. "Given that there are no children involved and no contested assets, this should be relatively straightforward," Patricia said. "You've both agreed to split everything equally, including the house proceeds once it sells." I looked at Ursula across the table. She was wearing a blue dress I had never seen before, and I wondered when she had bought it, what other parts of her life were already moving forward without me. "There is one thing I'd like to discuss," Ursula said, speaking directly to Patricia rather than to me. "I want to make sure Mark understands that I don't want any ongoing contact after this is finalized. No birthday cards, no holiday calls, nothing. I need a clean break." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I had harbored some small hope that maybe, eventually, we could at least be civil to each other, perhaps even friends. But she was making it clear that she wanted me completely out of her life. "Ursula, you can't mean that. We were friends before we were married. Surely we can." "No, Mark." For the first time in months she looked directly at me. "Friends don't betray each other the way you betrayed me. I need to heal, and I can't do that with you in my life in any capacity." The house sold quickly. It was a good house in a desirable neighborhood, the kind of place we had dreamed of when we first got married. I remembered the day we had gotten the keys, how we had danced in the empty living room, planning where we would put furniture, talking about the children we might have there someday. On the day of the final walkthrough before closing, I arrived to find Ursula already there with her sister Rebecca. They were going through the house one last time, and I could hear their voices echoing through the empty rooms. "You sure about this, Ursula?" Rebecca was saying. "It's not too late to try counseling or something." "I'm sure," Ursula replied. "Some things can't be fixed, Becca. Some betrayals are just too deep." When they saw me, Rebecca gave me a look that could have frozen hell. She had never liked me much to begin with, and now she had ammunition for all her suspicions about my character. "Hello, Mark," she said coldly. "Ursula's almost done here." I nodded and walked through the house alone, seeing it empty for the last time. In our former bedroom, I found a single photograph that had been left behind. It was from our honeymoon in Italy, both of us grinning at the camera in front of the Trevi fountain. Ursula looked so young and happy, so trusting. I slipped the photo into my pocket. When I came back downstairs, they were preparing to leave. Ursula had a small box of what looked like final items, things that had been missed in the main packing. "I think that's everything," she said to Rebecca, then turned to me. "The keys are on the kitchen counter." "Ursula, wait." I stepped toward her, not sure what I wanted to say, just knowing I couldn't let this moment pass without trying one more time. "I know you hate me and I understand why. But I need you to know that what we had was real. All those years, all those memories, they meant something. They meant everything to me. She was quiet for a long moment and I thought maybe I had reached her somehow. Then she spoke, her voice steady but sad. Mark, that's what makes this so much worse. If you had been unhappy, if our marriage had been falling apart, I could understand why you did what you did. But we were good together. I was happy. I thought you were happy too. The fact that you threw all of that away for a few weeks with someone you barely knew, that's what I can't forgive. She turned and walked out the door, Rebecca following behind her with a final disapproving glance at me. I stood in our empty house and listened to their car pull out of the driveway for the last time. The months after the divorce were a blur of loneliness and regret. I moved into a small apartment across town, furnished it with whatever I could find at secondhand stores and discount retailers. It was a far cry from the warm, welcoming home Ursula and I had created together. Work became my refuge, but even that was tainted by memories. Chicago is a big city, but not big enough to completely avoid running into people from your past life. I would see our former neighbors at the grocery store, couples we used to have dinner with at restaurants. They would give me awkward smiles and make polite small talk, but I could see the questions in their eyes. They had heard about the divorce, probably knew some version of why it happened. One evening, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was walking home from work when I saw Ursula across the street. She was coming out of a bookstore carrying a small bag and she looked different. Not just healthy, though she did look fully recovered from her surgery, but genuinely content in a way I hadn't seen in the months leading up to our separation. She was wearing her hair shorter than she used to, and she had on a red coat I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered crossing the street trying to talk to her, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the peaceful expression on her face, or maybe it was finally understanding that she was better off without me. I watched her walk to her car and drive away, and I realized it was probably the last time I would see her. Chicago might be big but not infinite, and if she was moving on with her life, really moving on, our paths probably wouldn't cross again. That night, I called my sister in Portland, someone I hadn't spoken to since before the divorce. Karen had always liked Ursula, and I knew she would have opinions about what had happened. Mark? Oh my God, I was wondering when you'd call. I heard about the divorce from Mom. Karen's voice was a mixture of concern and something that sounded like disappointment. Yeah, well, it's been a rough year. Mom said something about you cheating while Ursula was in the hospital. Please tell me that's not true. The silence stretched between us across the miles. Finally I said, it's true. Jesus, Mark. What were you thinking? Ursula was fighting for her life and you were... God, I can't even process this. I wasn't thinking. That's the problem. I was selfish and stupid and weak and I destroyed everything. Karen was quiet for a long moment. You know, Ursula called me a few months ago. She was checking in, seeing how I was doing. She didn't badmouth you or anything, but I could hear how hurt she was. Mark, that woman loved you with everything she had. I know. I know that now. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting it sounds like you knew it then too, and you threw it away anyway. Her words stung because they were true. I had known exactly what I was risking, and I had chosen to risk it anyway for a few moments of feeling desired and alive. After that conversation I realized I needed help. Not to win Ursula back, that ship had sailed, but to understand how I had become someone capable of such betrayal. I found a therapist, Dr. Morrison, and began the painful process of examining my choices. Tell me about the moment you first realized you were attracted to Jennifer, Dr. Morrison said during one of our early sessions. I thought about it carefully. It wasn't immediate. At first, she was just this friendly nurse who was kind to me during a horrible time. But gradually, I started looking forward to seeing her. She made me feel normal, I guess. Like I wasn't just this worried husband sitting vigil in a hospital. And what was it about feeling normal that appealed to you? That was a harder question to answer. I suppose, when I was with Ursula I felt helpless. I couldn't fix her, couldn't take away her pain, couldn't speed up her recovery. I was just this useless person watching the woman I loved suffer. But with Jennifer I felt like myself again. I felt capable, attractive, useful. So in a way, your relationship with Jennifer was about escaping from the difficulty of being present for Ursula's illness. It was a brutal but accurate assessment. I had chosen the easy path, the path where I felt good about myself, instead of the hard path of being present for my wife's suffering. These therapy sessions continued for months, and slowly I began to understand the psychology behind my betrayal. It didn't excuse what I had done, but it helped me recognize the patterns of thinking that had led me there. 1 year after the divorce, I made a decision that Dr. Morrison had been encouraging me toward for months. I wrote Ursula a letter. Not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, but simply acknowledging the full scope of what I had done and taking responsibility for it. The letter took me weeks to write. I went through dozens of drafts, each time trying to strip away any hint of self-pity or excuse-making. Here's what I finally sent. Dear Ursula, I know you asked for no contact and I will respect that wish after this letter. But there are things I need to say not because I expect anything from you, but because you deserve to hear them. I have spent this past year in therapy, trying to understand how I became someone capable of betraying you when you needed me most. What I've learned is that there is no acceptable explanation for what I did. I was selfish, cowardly, and cruel. When you were fighting for your life, I should have been fighting alongside you. Instead, I sought comfort elsewhere because it was easier than facing the possibility of losing you. I chose my own emotional comfort over your trust, and in doing so, I lost both. You were right when you said I made you doubt everything about our marriage. That might be the most unforgivable part of what I did, not just the betrayal itself, but the way it poisoned even our good memories. I want you to know that none of it was your fault. You were a loving, faithful, devoted wife, and you deserved so much better than what I gave you. The failure was entirely mine. I hope you are healing and finding happiness. You deserve all the good things life can offer. With deep regret and respect, Mark. I never heard back from her and I didn't expect to. But writing that letter felt like an important step in acknowledging the full weight of what I had done. About 18 months after our divorce, I was having lunch at a small restaurant downtown when I overheard a conversation at the next table. Two women were talking and one mentioned Ursula's name. She's doing so much better now, the woman was saying. I mean, the divorce was hard, but she's really found herself. She's taking art classes, traveling with her sister. She even mentioned she might be ready to start dating again. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this. Relief that she was healing and moving forward, but also a sharp pang of loss. The idea of her with someone else was difficult, though I knew I had no right to feel that way. 2 years post-divorce, I had settled into a routine that, while not happy exactly, was at least stable. I had moved to a better apartment, made some new friends through work and therapy groups, and was slowly rebuilding my life. But I still carried the weight of what I had done. I never did hear from Jennifer again after those initial attempts to contact me. I learned through hospital gossip that she had moved to a different city about 6 months after everything happened. I wondered sometimes if she understood the devastation she had helped cause, or if she simply saw it as a relationship that didn't work out. On what would have been Ursula's and my 20th wedding anniversary, I found myself at the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. Ursula used to visit there on special occasions, and we had often talked about how much her grandmother had meant to her. I didn't expect to see her there, but as I was walking back to my car, I spotted her kneeling by the gravestone with fresh flowers. She looked different again, her hair was longer now and she was wearing a dress I had never seen. She looked peaceful, content in a way that made my heart ache. For a moment I considered approaching her, but something in her posture, the way she seemed so complete, so self-contained, told me that would be wrong. This was her space, her healing, her life moving forward. I had no place in it. As I drove away, I realized that seeing her like that, healthy, at peace, moving forward, was perhaps the greatest gift I could have received. Not for my own sake, but because it meant that my actions, devastating as they had been, had not destroyed her permanently. She had survived not just her illness, but also my betrayal, and had found a way to build something new. 3 years after our divorce, I received an unexpected piece of mail. It was a wedding invitation not from Ursula, but from her sister Rebecca. She was marrying her longtime boyfriend and somehow, incredibly, I was invited. I stared at the invitation for a long time, unsure what to think. Rebecca had made her feelings about me very clear during and after the divorce. Why would she want me at her wedding? I called the number on the invitation to RSVP and Rebecca answered. I wasn't sure you'd call, she said when I identified myself. I'm surprised you invited me, I replied honestly. There was a pause. Look, Mark, I'm not going to pretend I wasn't furious with you. What you did to my sister was unforgivable. But, she's moved on. She's happy. And despite everything, you were part of our family for 15 years. This felt like the right thing to do. Will Ursula be okay with me being there? I asked her before I sent the invitation. She said she didn't mind as long as you understood that she has no interest in talking to you. The wedding was small, held in a beautiful garden venue outside the city. I arrived early, unsure of what to expect. Ursula was there when I walked in, and for a moment our eyes met across the room. She nodded slightly, not friendly but not hostile either, and then turned back to her conversation. She looked radiant. Not in the way a bride looks radiant, but in the way someone looks when they've found peace with themselves. She was talking to a man I didn't recognize, tall, kind-looking, about our age. The way he listened to her, the way she smiled at him, made it clear this was more than friendship. I felt that familiar pang of loss, but also something else, genuine happiness for her. She had found someone who could give her what I had failed to: consistency, faithfulness, trust. During the ceremony, I watched Rebecca and her fiancé exchange vows, promising to love and honor each other through sickness and health, for better or worse. The words that I had once spoken to Ursula, words I had failed to live up to when they mattered most. At the reception, I kept my distance from Ursula and her companion, not wanting to intrude on her happiness. But as I was preparing to leave, she approached me. "Mark," she said quietly, "thank you for coming. I know this must have been difficult for you." "Thank you for allowing it," I replied. You look happy." She smiled slightly. "I am. It took time, but I am. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." We stood there for a moment in awkward silence, two people who had once known each other better than anyone, now virtual strangers. "I got your letter," she said finally. "I never responded, but I got it. It meant something to know that you understood what you had done. I'm just sorry it took me so long to understand it." She nodded. "We all make mistakes, Mark. Some are just bigger than others. The important thing is that we learn from them." "Have you forgiven me?" I asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't fair to ask her to absolve me of my guilt. She was quiet for a long moment. "I've forgiven you enough to move on with my life. That's the most forgiveness I have to give, and I think it's enough." It was honest and fair, and more than I deserved. "Thank you," I said. "For everything. For all the good years, and for handling the bad ones with more grace than I ever showed." She smiled again, sadly this time. "Goodbye, Mark." "Goodbye, Ursula." I watched her walk back to her companion, who put his arm around her protectively but not possessively. As they left together, I realized this was probably the last time I would ever see her. 5 years have passed since our divorce now. I still live in Chicago, still work at the same company, though I've been promoted twice. I've dated some, but nothing serious. I'm not sure I trust myself yet with someone else's heart, and I'm certainly not ready to ask someone to trust me with theirs. I still see Dr. Morrison regularly, though less frequently now. We've worked through most of the issues that led to my betrayal, but I continue going because I never want to become complacent about my capacity for causing harm. Last month, I ran into Jennifer at a coffee shop. She was in town visiting friends, she said, and had moved to Denver where she works at a children's hospital. She looked older, more mature, and when she asked if I'd like to catch up over coffee, I politely declined. "I understand," she said. "That whole situation was complicated." "No," I said more firmly than I intended. "It wasn't complicated. It was wrong. We were both adults who made bad choices that hurt an innocent person. There's nothing complicated about that." She looked surprised by my directness but nodded. "You're right. I hope Ursula is doing well." "She is. She's moved on and found happiness, no thanks to either of us." As I walked away from that encounter, I realized how much I had changed. The Mark who had started an affair 5 years ago would never have spoken so directly about responsibility and consequences. Growth, I suppose, though it had come at a terrible cost. These days, I volunteer at a local hospital, not the one where Ursula was treated, but a different one across town. I help with patient transport, moving people to and from procedures, sitting with families in waiting rooms. It's my way of trying to give back some of the care and compassion I failed to show when it mattered most. Sometimes I see husbands sitting vigil by their wives' bedsides, looking exhausted and scared, and I want to tell them, stay strong, be present, don't let fear or loneliness drive you to make choices you can't take back. But I never do. It's not my place to give advice about fidelity and commitment. I lost that right the moment I chose my own comfort over my wife's trust. I think about Ursula often, wondering how she's doing, hoping she's still happy. I saw a wedding announcement in the paper last year. Ursula married the man I had met at Rebecca's wedding. The photo showed her in a simple but elegant dress, radiant with joy. He looked at her the way I used to look at her, the way she deserved to be looked at. I cut out that wedding announcement and keep it in my wallet, not out of masochistic self-torture but as a reminder. A reminder that actions have consequences, that trust once broken may never be repaired, but also that people can heal and find happiness again, even after the worst betrayals. I don't know if I'll ever remarry. Part of me thinks I don't deserve that kind of happiness again, but Dr. Morrison says that's my guilt talking, not wisdom. Maybe someday I'll be ready to try again, armed with a better understanding of what commitment really means. But for now, I focus on being a better person than I was 5 years ago. I try to be honest in all my dealings, reliable for my friends, present for the people who matter to me. I can't undo the harm I caused, but I can make sure I never cause that kind of harm again. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had made different choices during those crucial weeks when Ursula was in the hospital. What if I had talked to a therapist then instead of seeking comfort in another woman's arms? What if I had been honest with Ursula about how scared and helpless I felt? What if I had been the man she thought she had married? But those are questions without answers, roads not taken that I'll never be able to travel. All I can do is live with the consequences of the choices I made and try to make better ones going forward. The truth is, I loved Ursula. I loved her deeply and genuinely, even as I was betraying her. That's perhaps the most shameful part of it all. Not that I betrayed someone I didn't care about, but that I betrayed someone I loved because I was too weak to handle my own fear and loneliness. Love, I've learned, is not just a feeling. It's a choice made daily to put someone else's well-being alongside your own. It's showing up, especially when showing up is hard. It's being faithful not just in body but in spirit, not just when things are good but especially when they're difficult. I failed at love when it mattered most. Ursula deserved a partner who would hold her hand through the darkness, not one who would seek light elsewhere. She deserved someone who would fight for their marriage when it was tested, not someone who would abandon it at the first sign of real adversity. She found that someone eventually, and I'm genuinely glad she did. She deserves all the happiness in the world, and if I couldn't give it to her, I'm grateful someone else could. As for me, I carry the weight of what I did every day. Not as punishment, though it certainly feels like that sometimes, but as motivation to be better. To be the kind of person who keeps his promises, who chooses love over comfort, who stays present in the face of fear. I don't expect forgiveness from Ursula or from anyone else. What I did was unforgivable. But I do hope that by sharing this story, maybe someone else will make a different choice when they find themselves in a similar situation. Maybe someone will choose to stay, to fight, to be faithful, even when it's hard. Because the alternative, the path I chose, leads only to regret and loss. And once you've walked that path, once you've seen the devastation that betrayal leaves in its wake, you can never unknow the true cost of infidelity. It doesn't just cost you your marriage. It costs you your integrity, your self-respect, and the love of someone who trusted you with their whole heart. And those are prices no moment of weakness is worth paying. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.